Good morning. Welcome to Fort Myers. We're here in front of the old Lee County Courthouse today. We're gathered here today not to talk about or discuss exactly what the quote was that our current Congressman Byron Donalds made last week, but what we are going to talk about is what is evoked among people, members of the community, when they hear the term Jim Crow. And we want to state very clearly what he has not been saying, which is that the Jim Crow era was a brutal, violent, and shameful part of American history that must never be forgotten, never be glossed over, and never be repeated. I'm going to open the press conference with just a very short prayer. Oh Lord, we thank you for this beautiful day. May the words of our mouths and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord. Amen. I'm going to start with a statement that former school board member Gwenetta Gittens sent to me. As you know, Gwenetta Gittens has been an educator for many years, and she was a fierce advocate for her community when she served as a member of a school board. What she said was, when someone of that stature says we were better off in the Jim Crow period, do most people really understand what that means? Most of our younger children don't know, especially because we can't teach the truth about it from all sides and perspectives of American history. A statement like black people were better off during a dark time period is lost on those with no perspective of how bad it truly was and the remnants that still remain even today. As I said, that was a letter sent from former school board member Gwenetta Gittens.
In reference to the word Jim Crow, that word Jim Crow is very offensive to African Americans. That word is just like throwing water in our face, and there is a lot of negative actions that is behind that word. I grew up in Taylor County, and if you know anything about Rosewood, a lot of people in Taylor County was affected by Rosewood, and Jim Crow was part of that era. So if anyone wants to use that word Jim Crow, please do not put it out in public. And Byron Donalds, you are an embarrassment to the African American people, because you should not have ever used the word Jim Crow. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'm going to ask Janice Cass, who is Janice Cass Esquire, who is a founding board member of the Black History Museum, to come and say a few words. Welcome, Janice.
Good morning. I am a child of Jim Crow. I was born and reared and went to school under the oppressive Jim Crow laws. I know what it feels like to come downtown to where we are right now and feel the oppressiveness of segregation. I know what it feels like to be in a grocery store with two water fountains standing right next to each other. One marked white, that's brand new and shiny and cool. You can see that it's cool because water is just dripping all off of it. And a rusty, old, broke down water fountain next to it with a sign that says colored. I remember me and my sisters taking turns looking around, watching out while we drank from the white water fountain, because we weren't going to put our mouths on that crusty looking colored water fountain under any circumstances. There's nothing romantic about not feeling a complete human being, that it's okay for you to go anywhere that you want to go and be anywhere that you want to be, to choose your friends. I grew up in a community that was completely segregated, where we were literally divided by a railroad track, where the area that I live in used to historically be called Safety Hill, because that was the safest place for people of color to be after dark. I remember growing up constantly seeing images of segregationists, of leaders of the Civil War, people who wanted to keep me and my generation and my descendants enslaved, in rags, unable to advance ourselves. Now we still have to live under these some images because we stand in front of a courthouse where our commissioners boldly taunt a picture of a leading segregationist, a person who committed treason against the United States of America, who's still glorified. But we're asked to dismiss these ideas, these facts, these truths, and to ignore the reality of our existence. As Kari said earlier, we got laws now today in modern America in free Florida that does not allow me to talk about my history if I'm in a classroom with students because it might hurt someone's feelings. The truth does hurt sometimes. And the reality that we live in is that there was nothing pleasant about segregation. There was nothing equal about separate but equal. And we are the people who had to live through that existence. Nobody should have to have lived through it. You can just read about it, maybe if you can sneak away some banned books, or even look at old footage. It's documented. God bless America, and may America continue to move toward the vision of democracy and equality for all people.
Thank you, Janice, for that very personal and deeply moving perspective. Now, our next speaker is going to be a gentleman who grew up here in the Dunbar area and who is looking to serve Florida House District 78, Howard Sapp.
Thank you, Kari, and great support. Continue to support Kari Lerner for her bid for Congress. Again, my name is Howard Sapp. I am the candidate for House District 78, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about very briefly is the Jim Crow, and what do you think about when you hear Jim Crow, and a little bit of history when it comes to Jim Crow. Jim Crow, we know, is the name assigned to legislation, that started from 1850 up to about 1965. And this legislation was, even as the previous speaker, Ms. Janice Cass, had spoke about, was basically segregation and separate but equal, and the black against white, or the blacks not being able to partake of some of the basic services that whites were able to take advantage of. So being able to keep those separate was what Jim Crow was all about. As we're here today, because of a comment that was made, especially from one of our legislators, to say or to think that the African American community family was better in the Jim Crow area. It's a lot that we could actually get into in reference to that. However, here's a legislator that, when it comes to family, has an F, basically coming from the Housing Family Committee, that spoke against, or did not vote for, even when you look at John Lewis in his civil acts legislation that he wanted to move forward. So when it comes to these particular type of things and these type of actions from a legislator, when it comes to trying to bring a community together and closer to the average American way of life, this is very disturbing, because we're here to try and bring us together, to unify, not to keep us separate as the Jim Crow laws and legislation was. And we have to understand that this is more, for Jim Crow, more of a systematic piece, not from a Democrat, Republican standpoint, but from a systematic piece that America has to address. So when we look at these things, we have to look at so many things: the civil rights activity. We have to look at the injustices that in basically continue to plague African Americans and other minority groups, organizations, that's today. So here is where we as legislators have to come together to understand that everybody is equal. One group is not better than another group, and certainly when it comes to the Jim Crow era, that's an era that we don't want to return to. Because we want people to feel as though, yes, our government, our legislators have your best interest at heart. Families are most important, and when it comes to families being together, that's something that we want to cherish. We want to bring closer. We want to make sure that our kids are protected, our women are protected. We want to make sure that our families are protected, our black men are protected. These are things that we want to make sure that we speak out against any injustices against these groups or people. So when it comes to hearing Jim Crow and thinking that there was some type of benefit or some type of whatever he wanted to think or to say or to make it seem as though it was good at that particular time, trust and believe, if you would go into the home of those that were affected, you would truly understand and see, even as Janice Cass was saying, how that affected them when you hear Jim Crow. Jim Crow was not a friend. It was not anything good. It was not anything that made people feel good, especially when you look at, again, a state where it's trying to now censor, how history is written, a state to where now it's trying to censor, what books you can read simply because of the fact that, some may or may not like a word or a name or something that's in that book. So when you look at these things tend to take us back to that particular era. And I guarantee you that's a place that we don't want to go. So as you look at the Jim Crow and think about Jim Crow, understand that there was something that kept us apart and not brought us together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's Howard Sapp, candidate for Florida State House District 78. Next, we are going to be completely blessed with a musical presentation from Ms. Darlene Mitchell.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, and let me stand. I am so tired, I am weak, and I am worn through the storms, through the night. Lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me on home. The fight continues for those injustices. The fight continues, and we stand in unity and in solidarity for the peace of mind to those families who lost loved ones due to lynching. And we stand on our faith, and our faith we will sing, we shall overcome, we shall overcome, we shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
Thank you so much. That was Darlene Mitchell. And I want to tag off a minute on what Darlene said. When we here in Fort Myers, when we talk about lynchings during the Jim Crow era, we think of R.J. Johnson and Milton Williams, teenage boys who just 100 years ago, last month, were lynched just down the road here in Fort Myers during the Jim Crow era. That's what the Jim Crow era meant to those families, and we don't ever want to forget about it. Next, I'm going to bring up Mr. Earl Sparrow.
Good morning, and thank you, Kari, for giving me this opportunity to speak for a few moments. about what's going on with the whole notion that black families were stronger under the Jim Crow era, which is what he actually said. They're stronger. Those families of R.J. Johnson and Milton Williams who were lynched wouldn't say that their family was stronger when those two teenagers were lynched. Those families that were unable to come downtown and eat inside restaurants in Fort Myers wouldn't say they were stronger. Those families that had to sit on the other side of the colored waiting section for buses or drink out of those rusty water fountains wouldn't say, or use those inadequate bathrooms that were for coloreds only, would say that era was correct, was better. In the end, it was a lie. It was not the truth. And in the end, we have to speak truth to power. And speaking truth to power means showing exactly what actually happened and not playing fuzzy with the numbers. He said also that black people voted conservatively. The conservatives in the Jim Crow era were Democratic. The conservatives in those eras were Bull Connor was a Democrat, and all these other segregationists that were. Why would our ancestors vote for those conservatives who were segregationists, who wanted black people to stay out of their schools, stay out of their businesses, stay out of downtown, and not have access to the things that our tax dollars were paying for? It's playing fast and funny with the facts. The facts are liberals and conservatives have switched many times. Back in the 1800s, later 1800s, the Republicans were the liberal party. They don't say that, but they'll say the Democrats are the party of slavery and segregation and everything else. In the 1960s, late 60s and 1970s, the entire Confederacy was solid blue until the 1965, 1968 Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act. Then the South, which remained conservative, switched over to be solidly red. So we're here to speak truth to power. Black people have always voted in their best interest. Byron Donalds is a benefactor of the fight for civil rights. If it was not for liberal policies, he would not be a black legislator at all. Conservatives would have preferred conserving power in the white, powerful hands of white men. He's not a white man. So the same people that bust their butts to make sure we had a right to vote and he had a right to run for office are the same people he's insulting with that half-truth. We speak truth to power, and he knows it, and we stand against those words that we were stronger. We were stronger because we can only live in a certain area. We were stronger because we can only, if we ventured out of those safety hill places, we would lose our lives. So tell the whole truth and not a half-truth. That's what we stand for, and we support Kari, who will speak truth to power. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Earl, for those passionate and personal words. We do appreciate it. Next up, we have a woman who is the only, as we believe, she's the only guest teacher in the Lee County school system who was nominated for a Golden Apple Award. And she is running for Lee County School Board for the at-large District 7. We have Sheraton Chester.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you very much for having me here. I had to listen to Byron again last night just to be sure what was going on. I think he has his facts about history misunderstood. I think that the time he should have brought up during that period might have been the Renaissance. Even the Depression would have been a better time to say we were sticking together, because as soon as we came out of slavery, we were more cohesive. We had to be cohesive. We had to form our own businesses. We had to form our own churches. We were not allowed to drink from your water fountains. We were not allowed to be in public buildings together. I read some of the most insane. We were not allowed to play checkers or dominoes with white people at a table in a park. We were not allowed to boat with each other anymore. That's not people. That's government separating people from each other. And that he could think that at a time as precarious as that was the best time in our history, I find that kind of sad, and that he's misinformed and not properly educated about what his history truly is. I just want to read just a couple of things. Do you tell me whether or not you thought it was better? Because that Johnson story was horrible. They killed both men. That was an absolute ridiculousness. Before I go any further, Jim Crow laws were the laws that Nazi Germany used to replicate what they were going to do in Europe. Jim Crow laws facilitated Nazism in Germany. If a black person rode in a car driven by a white person, the black person sat in the back seat or the back of a truck. We still had to do that. It didn't end. Jim Crow hasn't ended. Jim Crow has become more subtle. Now, instead of separating us, we were never allowed to be in groups. We're not allowed to group together. We're not allowed to show affection in public because it was a sign of equality and that it was immoral for us to be able to do that. But Jim Crow laws segregated and established anti-racism in this country and made it right and made it acceptable. And what's happening now seems to be a repeat performance of that very same mentality. That's what's got to stop. And it's got to stop with us. It's got to start with us. This is not a new issue. Black people have been lynched and unjustly arrested, detained all the time. This is not something new. Everybody's acting like it's a brand new pair of shoes. We've been living through this. I was one of the first blacks to integrate Big Pharma. You have no idea how frightening it was to go to work every day knowing that white people did not want you there and that they would tell you they don't want you there. Or when I went to go to high school for the first time, and it was the saddest thing that ever happened. A white boy wanted to spit my face off the bus, but a little white girl passed in front of me, and all that phlegm went in her hair. A man assaulted me with an umbrella. How dare you niggas be in this neighborhood? I was told here when I first moved here, this is the first place I've ever lived where I was actually not comfortable, because I was told to drown myself in the river after I was here like 2 weeks. Why are you in this neighborhood? What are you doing here? So we have got to coalesce as a people, not as a group, not because of any specific rule. We have to start to coalesce as a human race and stop segregating ourselves. Governments do that. We're family. We are not individuals just thrown out here helter-skelter. We mean to be together, and we have to work for that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheridan, for those impassioned and informative words. Thank you. Next up, we're going to hear from the Vice President of the Democratic Black Caucus, Willie Middleton.
Thank you, Terry. I'm also with the LGBT caucus, and you can imagine how it would have been for us during Jim Crow time. I have to say that Byron Donald is definitely someone that has not been informed. He's never been informed on anything. How he's gotten to where he is absolutely amazing. And if Mr. Donald would stop and think today, if he was doing Jim Crow, where would he be today? And what would have happened to him today? With his family situation, he would have to realize that during Jim Crow, it wouldn't have been allowed whatsoever. So he needs to stop and think where he's come from, where he's been, and who has helped him along the way to be able to move in a position that he's in. He can never come up with anything of his own. Everything he says come from the cronies of the Republican Party. It's time for a change. It's another great day in America, and we shouldn't have to keep putting up with things or hearing things about things like Jim Crow. I'm trying to be nice about this, so I'm going to get off this mic because I told to keep it nicely. But I could say some things to put that man in his place and let him know what he needs to be doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Willie. It is our sincerest hope that the members of the press who were invited here today to hear the words of members of the community and how the Jim Crow era impacted their lives personally and directly. It is our hope that they will take those words and share them as far and as wide as they did the words that evoked this strong emotion. The Jim Crow era in the United States of America was a brutal, terrible part of our history that can never be repeated, never be glossed over, and never be forgotten. The promise of America is not that she is perfect, but that united we can be better. In order to achieve the more perfect union, we must face honestly and without flinching those times in our history where we fell short on that ideal. I thank you all for coming here today. May God bless America and may God protect our service members. Thank you very much.